Okay, hi, welcome. Beginning of the day, how's everybody's head today if you were out last night? You see, I don't believe that. So welcome to my talk today. I'm going to be talking, trying to give some tips for indie developers working in Unity. It's a bit of a broad topic, I'll be honest, so I'm going to pick probably the most salient points I can think of to try and give some usefulness in 45 minutes. I'm coming today not as an employee of Unity, even though I work there. I am an indie developer, so today I'm an indie dev talking to you. These do not represent the views of my employer. And also it means that I don't have access to our wonderful library of images and videos that I can use, so I'm afraid you're getting memes. Terrible, terrible memes, and one top tier one, if you can spot, very top tier Unity meme. So how many of you in the room today are indie developers? Look at all those hands, look at all those hands. How many of you are solo indie developers? Yeah, go the solos, excellent. And how many of you have shipped a game? That's quite a lot of hands, this is impressive. How many of you are close to shipping a game? Excellent, that's what we like. We're everywhere, indie developers. But it's good, right? I'm excited being in the industry now. There are more indie developers today than there have ever been. I think this is a really exciting space. I think we come up with some really cool stuff. What we're gonna do is we're gonna talk today about trying to be successful, right? And as indie developers, we often think, what's right in front of me and what am I working on? Whereas I wanna help you when your games are successful. This is about being kind to future you, so that future you doesn't look back at today you and go, why did you do that? Why have you made my life so difficult today? So we're gonna talking about getting started making games. I'll try and give you some useful tips about Unity and the development environment, some best practices. I'm gonna talk about submission and certification for those of you that don't know what that is. I'll try and give you some useful tips on that. And a bit around that wonderful thing that we all love doing, marketing our own games, because we're great at it, especially me as a solo indie dev. No. And then I'll try and give 5 to 10 minutes for open QA. So who am I? I'm James. I work at Unity. I'm a senior manager of technical product management at Unity. So what I look after is everywhere that Unity operates as a runtime and an editor. So I look after desktop, consoles, web, basically making Unity work in all the places that it works. So in my day-to-day, I'm not only responsible for all the features that we build, but helping developers ship across all of these platforms. A lot of you as indie developers will want to be multi-platform developers and target as many platforms as possible. That's my wheelhouse. So I'm afraid it's going to be focused a little bit more towards the platform side, because the editor side is pretty much the same, you know, in terms of features and how we build things and animation and 2D and all that kind of stuff. Whereas platforms tends to be the bit that catches everybody out when they're looking to move across them. I've released some games, some terrible ones. I did a game in 2016, was my first ever shipped game. It was called Crazy Cars. It's not available on the store, so you can't look up how awful it is. But I do have it on my phone because I still have the old build there. I'm actually really proud of it. It was totally rubbish, but it was the first time I actually ever shipped something to a store, and going through the process of actually doing that. I did some VR work in the early days of when the DK1 and stuff was available. I was really happy with the puzzle game I made. And then I made my first quote unquote proper game in 2017, which was a local co-op multiplayer game called Jump Gunners, which I shipped on PC, Xbox and Switch. Xenosis, catch me over the bar if you want to hear a tale of woe and publisher stories. That unfortunately never made it to the light of day, but I have a really good demo and stuff of where that game was. And I've gone back to being a solo indie dev again and trying to ship my own projects whilst doing a full-time job, which, as any of you know, is almost impossible, but you know, here we are. I found this online and I really like it because I think it sums up about how we actually go about making games. Making games is really hard, right? And a lot of us, we love this space. I've got this great idea for a game and I'm going to make a game, and then you realize that you're kind of playing around in Unity and you're building loads of stuff, and we go through the land of confusion and then no, this is actually, I don't know what I'm making, but I've got this great idea that I just came up with for another game, so I'll prototype that, and so on. And so I tend to live in this little space here. It's wonderful. My hard drive is littered with many projects that never make it to light of day. And really what this is about, it tries to show, I think it's a really good representation that actually this beginning area here where we're trying to come up with the ideas of making games and actually figuring out what our games are, really the big part is here, is finishing a game is really hard. To get over the hurdle, I do like content mountain. I've also died a few times here as well. But it is entirely true. And hopefully some of the things that I can help you with are around this area here, which is about actually finishing and shipping a game. It can be really easy to fall into the trap of not finishing a game. And getting to a shipping, I did warn you, by the way, sorry, they are terrible memes. And I'm not going to apologize again for the terrible memes. I love them. But it is hard, right? And one of the things that I would always say whenever I'm working with indie developers, keep everything really simple. I think we all try to make our magnum opus, the game that we have all thought in our heads is going to be amazing. And there's nothing wrong with trying to make a simple game, because actually the process of shipping a game will teach you more about actually game development and what you need to do than actually endlessly trying to prototype and getting stuck in content mountain and realizing the game's too big. Keep it focused. Keep the design really simple. And there are a lot of we always think we have to make something really complex because we're indie developers, and therefore we've got to come up with a game that's, got to do this MMO with survival and crafting, and it's going to have like a first-person shooter mechanics, and it's going to have live service, and you're like, no, I can't do that. But actually, there's tons of massively successful games that are built around one simple core principle. Take a look at Vampire Survivors. That game is amazing, and it's built around one very simple core mechanic. The game is very deep, but the actual mechanic it's built around the concept is quite simple and focused, which I love. And make it achievable. This is where most people get stuck, is like, can I actually build the game that I want to make? And the way that I shipped Jump Gunners, I tried to give myself a target of 3 months. I'm going to ship a game in 3 months, by hook or by crook, and I will do it. And the only way you can do that is by keeping the design really simple. And I built it around one simple core mechanic and tried to ship a game that was around that. And that really helped me focus and actually work on and ship that game. And then I made the terrible mistake that most people do, and is like, well, I've shipped a game, I know what I'm doing now, so I'm going to build a sci-fi top-down multiplayer single-player game with extra crafting, and you're like, oh, right, I'm back here again. And that's where I ended up again. So here I am trying to take my own advice of like, keep things super simple. So let's then talk a bit about Unity, and top-tier Unity meme coming now. If you love the Matrix, it's a good meme. So let's talk about Unity. Unity is a product. First off, LTS or text stream. How many people here are developing on text stream releases of Unity or even know what it is? One person. Wow. Then this is a really simple bit. Don't ship on the text stream. Use long-term support, right? Yeah. And the text stream's great. The text stream is where all the new features are, and all the new stuff coming into Unity. If you want to be able to understand and use the features which are going to go into long-term support, but I would suggest any of you who are building and shipping games try and ship on the LTS or the long-term support version of Unity, because it's feature locked. It's considered to be robust, and it's, more importantly, supported on all the platforms. So if you have any problems, if you're trying to ship on it, the LTS version is fully supported for the life cycle of that LTS. So I would highly recommend sticking to that. When you're looking to use Unity, really do check the features. Some features of Unity don't work on all of the platforms that we actually provide it on. And sometimes it's really obvious stuff, right? Like, if you're making a mobile game and your mobile game is super successful, but you're monetizing using Unity ads, you're not going to be able to do that on an Xbox because you can't have ads. So that's really obvious one, like some of those features won't work. But some of the features that may not be entirely obvious, like, for example, your choice of render pipeline. HDRP doesn't work on all the platforms that Unity can ship on because not every device has the compatibility for that as a render pipeline, for example. And the one that tends to catch everybody out is third-party plugins. If you're using stuff from the asset store, if you're using third-party plugins, make sure you check that that person can actually support it on the platforms that you're looking to ship on. And the one that catches most people out is consoles. Consoles are very restricted in what you can actually execute on there. And a lot of the times, the people who make the plugins don't actually have access to the dev kits or have gone through the NDA program. So they've never tested to see whether, and the last thing you want is to build your entire game around the foundation of something you bought on the asset store, only to find that it doesn't work on one of the target platforms. And then you're kind of stuck. I already mentioned the render pipeline. Render pipelines, I would highly suggest to anybody in indie development who wants to target as many platforms as possible, choose URP. The U stands for universal. It works everywhere. And it actually, you know, I know sometimes you look at HDRP and you're like, but I want my game to look amazing. I want high definition. Well, the high definition render pipeline has specific use cases, specifically around hyper-realistic photorealism, if you're gonna, you know, or architectural use or visualization, or we're making like, it might not necessarily be required for your game. Your game, in the way that it's like, more than likely URP is a better choice for you in terms of performance and scalability across all the platforms. And for those who have never done the swapping of build targets, that's not as simple as it always is on desktop. For example, if you're building a game in Windows and you're like, I want to ship it on Linux or I want to ship it on Mac, you could just change it and go click, boom, and out comes a binary that you can then ship on that platform. Doesn't work on all the other platforms. You're going to have to do recoding inside your project. You may have to change graphics settings, quality settings, post effects, assets, shaders. There's a lot of things that might need to change per platform. And so being aware of those, it's not just as simple as pressing a button to swap between targets as it is on desktop. And this is the one that I try to say to everyone, please, 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 source control is your friend. It is very much your friend. Even if you're a solo developer, and it's weird, I speak to quite a few solo developers, and I'm like, well, I don't need source control, I don't work in a team. I'm like, source control is really useful for a number of reasons, not just about sharing of code and working on the same code base, but you may not consider it now, but you know, being able to go back and check your revisions, be able to move back to a version that actually worked before you made a load of changes in it. And now you're like, why doesn't my game work anymore? You know, there are source controls for that. I know that sometimes Git and command line Git and perforce can be a bit scary if you've never used these things before, but Unity now has plastic SCM and it's built into the editor. So you've got version control built straight into the editor now, and it's super useful and it works. And it's great for small teams. So yeah. As I mentioned, I'm a platforms guy. The most overlooked thing is normally the target platform. And when you're planning ahead for where you're going to be, the first thing you really want to do is get up to speed on the target platforms that you're doing by front-loading your learning. We do have documentation. The Unity website has great documentation. If you search up Unity multi-platform, it actually takes you to a page about multi-platform development in Unity where you can learn a lot of information, and a lot of it's really useful. There's more. It's really easy to not consider things and get caught out later in development when you're looking to swap between one platform and another. Build and test a dev environment, and that's like, I know that sounds really simple, but setting up a good dev environment and actually making sure you can push and test even an empty project to all of the targets that you want to go to means you're not trying to figure this out later. And when we're stuck in bug fixing or we're trying to ship and you're trying to push a build out to a phone and it doesn't work and you're like, yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. And then you go and ship it and realize that it doesn't actually work on that phone or you've got problems. So building a good test environment, I mean, for development, Mac and PCs, obviously, that's what most people use. Be aware, if you don't know this, you need a Mac if you're going to be building to iOS devices. You know, you can do it on a PC, but it's super hacky, and it's best to, if you're going to run Xcode and other things, like you need to run it on a Mac. The same goes for consoles. Most people, if you're building and you actually want to ship on consoles, you need a PC. You can't build for consoles on a Mac because most of the tools required to build to consoles are PC only. So having a good test environment, even if you're virtualizing an environment in there, being able to swap between the operating systems is useful. Dev kits are not required for all of the platforms, but I highly recommend them. The editor is not the hardware. It's not the same. And just because it operates well in the editor does not mean it's going to operate well on the hardware. And you really want to understand your target platforms. I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail later. But most people, I see a lot of people get caught in the trap of like, it runs fine on my PC. And it probably will do, because if you're also gamers, which most of us are, I suspect you use your gaming PC for development. And you're like, wow, my game runs 800 frames a second, until you go to then deploy it to a phone. And you're like, why does it run at 3? And that's because we've got to deal with CPU and GPU and RAM. Those are the most obvious ones, but we've also got shader compatibility. We've got storage speed. We've got thermal throttling limitations. All of these things exist, and therefore it's really worth thinking about, where do I want my game to go to? Buy yourself cheap hardware off of eBay. Set yourself some up. Buy cheap phones. And we'll come to a little bit more about that in a bit. And it is very costly to redo work. It doesn't feel like it now, especially if you aren't shipping games yet. But trust me, when you get to the point where you want to ship and you realize you've got to redo something that you should have done at the beginning, and it's now going to take you 3 months to pull that apart, that's costing you money and time. So I'm going to try and go through a few things that you can do up front that will help. So let's talk about being nice to future you. If anyone's been there, this cuts to the bone, that one. Be nice to future you. Comment your code. I know that sounds really like, how many people here actually comment their code? Now, how often do you comment it in a useful way that you could reread in? Yeah, exactly. Probably about 50% of the hands, right? It feels silly sometimes to comment code on a piece of code that you've written. You're like, well, it's super obvious what it does. It won't be in 3 months' time, and it definitely won't be in 2 years when you go to look back and you're like, what is that? What does it even do? And then you spend 2 hours trying to debug it, only to realize you never called it in the first place. You're like, why is it still in the project? You know, this happens a lot. And I don't have a team to bounce a lot of stuff off of. I'm a solo, and so commenting code, and also something that caught me out. On Jump Gunners, when I went to publish that, and I spoke to publishers, one of the publishers who was really keen on publishing the game was like, cool, can you send us over the project? We'd like to have a look through, because they were offering to do a lot of the porting work that was going through. And I'm like, oh, you're going to port the game? Amazing. And they're like, why has this not got any comments in it? They're like, you're going to have to go back and comment all your code, because we can't just take a code base with nothing in it. I'm like, oh yeah, just, so it's stuff like that, like, be kind to future you, even if it feels silly to write it out, because I guarantee you won't remember what it is. Abstracting code and minimizing your code rewrites. If you're rewriting code all the time, it's a candidate for you to abstract it. Things like creating your own namespaces in the project and writing your own tooling is a really useful thing to do. You're probably going to have to rewrite input over and over and over again, because every game needs input, and every game needs user management and save data and language options. Like, write your own set of tooling for that, put it in your own namespace, and then you can share it with all of your projects. It's really useful, and it will help you when you get to a porting, especially. You don't want to go back and find that you've hard-coded input everywhere with get key down .space, and you're like, oh my God, why did I put that 100 times in my UI code? Like, abstract that away to a code manager so that you're just getting action A or whatever, and all you have to do is change one script per platform that you're writing in. It sounds silly, and I know there's a lot of people nodding, but you'll be surprised how many people don't do it. And then there's a lot of rework. Rewrite code, as I said, to use in other projects. I'm gonna keep pointing that out, version control. It is your friend. Please do use it. So I do want to talk about consoles. How many people here have shipped to a console? Ooh, so you know the fun of certification. Cool, we'll come to that later. Being a console dev is really easy these days in Unity. It certainly never used to be. Being a console developer was for the triple A's of the world, and you could only aspire to be such a person. But today you can, and there are programs available for every platform for you to go and apply to. It's really simple, and actually, you'll find people from Idea, Xbox, and PlayStation, I believe, are actually here at the show. They're the nicest people in the world. All of them, I work with all of them in a professional capacity. Go and show them your game. I promise you, they want to see them, because a lot of people are quite afraid to show their stuff. And, oh, I couldn't go on Switch or Nintendo, they're not going to want this. And yet I look at people's games and I'm like, are you kidding? This game is amazing. Like, go and show it to people. They want your games. All you have to do is go to any of these portals, sign up as a developer, you will require to be a limited company if you're in the UK. So you do need to be a limited company, and they'll ship you dev kits and get you access to what you need. Honestly, these programs are amazing to work with. And actually, I wouldn't be stood on this podium today or working at Unity if it wasn't for the team at Idea Xbox. Because if they hadn't spotted my game when I went and talked to them at Develop in 2016, poor Agostino, I wish he was in the room, I love telling this story, but Agostino was here and I just trapped him he did a talk, he was head of Idea Xbox, and I just stopped him from leaving the room. I'm like, I want to show you this game. And he sat down and played it with me, and then I got access to the program, and then suddenly you're an Xbox developer, and then you get to go and display your games at shows, and then one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're working at Unity and doing this for a living, which is amazing. So I cannot recommend these programs enough. Everybody is wonderful, and they will help you out. Please go and show them your games. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to get a bit nerdy. For the programmers in the room, for the non-programmers in the room, soz. But there is a bunch of stuff that I just want to try and go through that will help. I promise it won't take long. First off, when we're looking at coding, there are a few things that you can do today that will help you in the future. First off, if you didn't know this, consoles require IL to CPP. You cannot, which means you can only use ahead-of-time compilation. Just-in-time compilation doesn't work. So if you're using things like reflection, serialization, and you're not actually initializing those in your game, you're going to have problems when you switch to console. So just to point out that as a future. How many use player prefs and resources? Come on, you can. It's okay. Yeah. Don't. I know that it's in the documentation, and I know it's a feature of Unity that's really simple for, you just want to pass in a float variable for your sound effect volume or whatever. Get into a habit of writing your own save game manager for this stuff and writing stuff to the disk properly. Player prefs doesn't work on all platforms. It works fine on PC. It does not work, especially on consoles. You can't use that. If you can imagine, on a console, you have a user, and that user has an allocation to that storage. You can't just blindly write to the hard drive, because that's bad, and they don't like you doing that. And then there's more and more platforms are being more specific about having to integrate with the platform's SDK in order to access the storage. So don't use that now. And the resources folder is a really simple one, but again, it actually dramatically increases your startup time. And then there are certain certification passes on a lot of platforms that will fail you if you hang a frame or if you hang the startup time. So if you're using the resources folder, the moment you boot the project, everything in the resources folder gets loaded into memory, and you will fail certification. I know, I did it, and it really annoyed me that I had to rewrite everything to get around that. You should be using addressables or asset bundles. If you're not doing this, please, I highly recommend to you, even if it's a small game, go and use that system built into Unity. If you read the documentation, you might think that it's for live teams with live content delivery needs, or you need to be able to do, for highly complex patching. But actually, this is really good to help you manage memory, reduce down the size of your binaries and your patch sizes. And again, it might not hurt you now, but it could hurt you in the future, because certain platforms have limitations to the file size you can do on a patch, or the file size you can do on a DLC, and you don't want to be re-uploading your entire binary every time you change one small thing in the game. It's just going to annoy players. So it's not a difficult system to use. Just go and do some tutorials on it online, but start using those in your projects. It will help you in the future, I promise you. Third-party plugins, I've mentioned it before. Be aware of them. They can cause you problems, especially when you're targeting closed platforms that don't allow you, because some of them bundle all kinds of stuff in there that you simply can't do. I've seen so many people get to the point where they have a game and it's then successful. Hooray! And then a publisher picks it up and you're like, double hooray! And then you're off and you're like, my game doesn't work. And now you realize that you've got to strip out like something big. This is the one that catches most people out. So, in all honesty, how many people profile their games? How many people profile them every time you make a major change to your code? Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's one of these things that it's boring and I hate doing it, and but basically the editor is not the same as the hardware, right? So this is the one that catches a lot of people out. You should only test your game in the editor for debugging purposes and gameplay testing. It shouldn't be used for play testing as to whether or not something is successful. And I've tried to say to people that when you've got to the point where you're committing something into source control, or you've hit a major development milestone, your new AI system is working, you've done the new pathfinding system for your enemies, or you've implemented a new level, do yourself a favor and test it on the actual hardware that you want the game to run on, and then profile it and see where you are. Because actually, testing regularly and saving your profile captures, I now get into the habit of, okay, my game is, let's say your gameplay code is running at 6 milliseconds. You're like, cool, I'm within my frame budget. And then you go and make a load of changes, you commit it to source control, you're happy, you've had a week of neurons firing, you come up with new stuff, and you're like, this game's awesome. Go and run it. Because if it's now running at 11 milliseconds, I want to know where that 3 has gone. Like, where is it? Because otherwise it's very easy for it to just build up and build up and build up, and now you're trying to pull apart the entire project, trying to find out. So testing regularly is super key. Mobile especially, if you're targeting mobile devices, you're probably going to want to sell your game worldwide. I mean, that's generally what we want to do. As of today, Unity still supports iOS 12, which means that iPhone 5Ss are still a fully supported phone. Will your game run on an iPhone 5S? I don't know. Have you tested it? Probably not. And you can buy an iPhone 5S super cheap now. It's always worth, maybe it isn't, it probably only represents X tiny percentage of the marketplace, but it does represent an X target percentage of the marketplace. And if your game runs badly, it causes the phone to overheat, thermal throttling, bad reviews. All of this will negatively affect your store rating. So do try to make sure that even if you do go down, maybe detect that you're on, do some kind of if statements and whatnot, look at the device IDs, do something in game to reduce down and make it scalable across the platforms that you're using. And if you're targeting Android, yeah, it gets even more complicated. When we look at the internal build statistics and the runtime statistics in Unity, if you build for Android now, you're targeting roughly 20,000 unique devices. And most of them are not from the major hardware manufacturers. They're not Samsung Galaxies. They're not, Huawei latest things. They're some rando put together, goodness knows where the drivers have come from or what chipset they're using. So your breadth that you're testing against is really good to try and buy up and make a good little testing farm. They're not expensive. You can get a lot of these phones dirt cheap on eBay. Who cares if it's got a cracked screen? Doesn't matter. I only need to see it running on the device and see how it's going. Also be aware that platforms have features that can only be tested sometimes in a sandbox environment. Especially consoles, if you're going to do things like, I need to check my achievements, I've got to check my storage works and all that kind of stuff, it won't work in the editor. You've got to deploy it to the device to test all that stuff. So being regular in testing and profiling and building it on device is going to be super important for you. Oh, I didn't click through. Profile after a milestone. Great, throwing myself off. Okay, cool. Certification, I'm just going to talk about it quickly. This cuts way too close to the bone. If you have been through certification before, you will likely fail it the first time and the second, and that's okay because certifications are generally there for closed platforms that require you to have an SDK to integrate into that platform environment. So all console platforms have certification and SDKs. Some XR platforms have it. Some mobile stores will have certification that you need to pass in some form or another. Really understand your certification processes early before, ideally, early on in development so that you can start building for them. There are certain things that are really easy to manage ahead of time, like dealing with your platform code. You can abstract all of that into a platform manager and just have the game talk to that. Your input code. Think about controller glyphs. Everywhere where you've got to do like press X repeatedly, you really want to abstract that so that you're knowing, because you'll fail certification when you go to a console that doesn't have an X and maybe it's a shape. Instead, you'll fail. You can't have glyphs from another platform on there. So you don't want to be going back trying to find out where you've used that a million times in the game. Abstract all that away so you can just be like, make your own API that says, give me a controller glyph, and you can do all of that in the back end. You want to be looking at your startup times, memory usage, all this kind of stuff. These are the things that fail certification, hanging frames. So the the key is, what I'm trying to get across is that there's quite a lot of them and a lot of people don't read the documentation. Be aware of all of the test criteria. Every platform has them. They're normally on their website in a big document, and yeah, there's a lot of them, but a lot of them won't be relevant to you. There's a lot around multiplayer, there's a lot around, like a lot of that stuff, if you're not building multiplayer games, it doesn't matter. But the key stuff, like the boot up time and all that kind of stuff, the biggest failure that we see when working with platforms is it fails to launch. You'd be amazed how many people submit their game to the store without ever testing it to see if it even launches on the device, and it doesn't. That's because they never deployed it to the hardware. So you've got to get ahead of that stuff. The submission process takes time. It can take days, it can take weeks. And if you're up against it and your publisher wants you to push out a build, be aware that you could be stuck. And if you fail submission, it could take a while before you find out, and then you've got to go back through the submission. I've seen studios get stuck in submission for months because obviously they fail the first test, and then it goes back, and then they fail the next one that's on there, and you're like, oh, because some of them don't test all of them. They just get to a fail state and then go, you failed, send it back, and then you have to work your way through it. Talk to your platform partner. They're really helpful in helping you get through this. And actually, again, some of them have tooling, offline tooling you can use. There are command line tools you can pass the binary to and go, check my build, and it will just spit out a bunch of failures. So you can do that really early on. Even when you're super early in development, test against it. Make sure that you're not failing some really obvious test cases. Marketing, yeah, we've all been there. Now we get away from the Unity stuff as just towards the end now. We're not game devs just anymore as indie developers, and especially those of you who put your hand up as a solo developers, we're marketeers now as well. Yay. And especially if you don't have a publisher to handle this for you. This is the situation that a lot of people get themselves into, and I would highly avoid against it. Lean in on marketing your games really early. Build like the most successful games that we see all the time are the ones that build their communities early. They're sharing really early stuff on super, like really early in development content stuff that's coming in and building those communities, talking about them, engaging people. There are tons of communities out there, Discord servers, Slack groups you can join. Events like this that we're here at today, like we've got to be pushing our games out there as indies all the time. And I want to go over something, and I don't want this to scare you. I just want it to be something to be aware of. When we look at the Steam stats as of last year, it's a pretty shocking position that a lot of games are in right now. And that really does show you that around 77 to 80% of games will never make enough money to cover the cost of making that game and not make a return on it. And that's not there to be like, oh my, everyone's like, screw this, I'm off. I'm not making games anymore. No. It's just to show you that it's a tough market out there. And a lot of these games sit in that sort of 57% area because the only thing they've done really to push it out there is send a couple of tweets. And how many times do you see the posts on Reddit of, I quit my day job 3 years ago and now I've made my first game? And you know, people are not going to be flooding to click to that to go and download your game. So we've got to get good at building marketing and building our communities early. And it's not generally something that it's a weird one, especially as a solo developer like me. I hate putting my games out there. Like, it feels super personal. Like, I built this, like this is mine. And if you say something nasty about it, I will cry for days. So I don't want to go and talk about it because that's a terrifying prospect, but you have to. Share early, and that's actually an interesting one. Share your stuff early. Don't be worried, no one's going to steal your ideas. I hear that quite a lot as well. I don't want to put my idea out there. Trust me, ideas are 10 a penny everywhere. But the ability to actually execute on those ideas and build a game and ship it, that's what puts us in the 1% of the 1% of indie developers out there who will actually ship it. YouTubers and Twitch is an interesting one. It used to be like, if you could get PewDiePie to play your game. But actually, a lot of the developers we speak to that have YouTubers and Twitch streamers playing their games, it does not equate to sales. Often they're playing single-player games or a story narrative game, like, well, the person's seen it that's that, right? They're not going to go and buy it now because they just watched somebody play through it. And so it's changed the marketplace of what kind of games are being successful through revenue on YouTube. There's a lot of the battle games and the battle royales and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, it's a very personal experience, or roguelikes and procedural games where what you're experiencing that time is yours. We have to think about that. But there was a time where, you know, if you just sent a few keys out to some streamers and they played it, it would equate to sales. But unfortunately, those days are not here anymore. So we've got to search for the opportunities where we can find them. Showcasing your games at indie events like this is really good. It's a great way to start marketing things and getting the word out there. It's just, there's no magic bullet for this, no silver bullet, but like all the guys who are downstairs on the show floor now are out there doing it. They're showing their games. They're getting people to play it. There are publishers walking around. There are indie funds walking around. There are venture capitalists, everything, and platform partners like ID and Sony. Get out there, share your stuff, talk about it. Don't be afraid, because actually feedback is coming, but it's okay. Feedback is great, because the one thing that we're most afraid of on that feedback is, what if it's terrible? Or what if they tell me a game's rubbish or it's not fun? You kind of need to hear that also. Like, if it's not fun, then find out why it's not fun. What didn't you like about it? What could I possibly change? What can I adapt on that? Also, feedback's great because as developers, we get blind to what we're actually building. It's really easy to get stuck in the forest of game development and ideas and blah, blah, blah. My son, who's in the audience here today, is my greatest game tester. He breaks everything. It really annoys me. I build a game, I'm like, hey, Ethan, play this. I'm like, why are you walking off there? What are you doing? Talk to the NPC. No, and the game's crashed. Why were you like, oh, okay, there's something that I didn't miss over there. Feedback and playing games, like, I've demoed my games now at the Idea Xbox stand at GDC twice, and Eurogamer and other places. The feedback I got was incredible, and it was so useful. And a lot of it went into the game. You know, people pick up on stuff that you just can't see. So yeah, be open to that. Have a good demo as well. A good vertical slice demo that showcases everything that your game can do in like 15 minutes, that somebody can just pick up and play. Because in my experience, you probably won't get more than 10. Normally it sits around 5. I've had people that the demo of my last game, you could complete it in like 45 minutes, but I think like 3 people did and they loved it. But the majority of people will pick it up. They're in a show, right? They're walking around, they're like, beep, 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 yes, it's great. And they walk off, right? So try and capture them with something simple that catches them at the time, and make sure you engage with them. Have a community ready that people can come and join. Come and join my Discord server, talk to me. I'll send you a build, come and play it. Like, the more people you share, there is literally no point in having the best game that no one knows anything about. Pitch docs, if you're going to be talking to publishers, and you want to put stuff out, coming armed with a demo and a pitch doc. This is pretty obvious stuff, but a lot of people don't have it ready when they're walking around shows like this. You should have a laptop out, ready to go, stuff ready to email to people. And attending events, yep, play your game. And I've had a lot of people have success by going to events that they don't necessarily have a ticket for. There is value in that, right? I've seen people do the hustle, right? We've got hustle when we do this. Eurogamer, GDC, there are people outside those events all day long, outside the doors with their laptops, ready to get people to play. They're looking at the badges like, come play my game for 5 minutes. And people like me, when I'm working the booth, or if I'm at Unity and I'm outside having a break, I go and play those games. A lot of us do. We're just having to wander around. What have you got? I'd love to see it. And then I'm like, hey, I can hook you up with somebody who might be able to do that, right? There's value in, even if you're not there, it's the hustle. That's what we got as indie devs, because if we don't have publishers behind us, that's what we've got to do. I'm going to stop talking now. I hope that was in some way useful and didn't bore the hell out of you for the last 40-odd minutes. I think we've got 5 minutes for QA. Everyone wants to leave. Oh, no, we do have a question.
That was a great talk, thank you. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've read somewhere that you can just, if you've got like an Xbox Series X or whatever, you can somehow enable that to be a dev kit without getting a platform that you can build to it. I don't know if that was like an older thing.
I, unfortunately, will have to reside back to everything that's under the specifics around that are all under non-disclosure agreements, and you have to. I would say you can find out information pertaining to that if you sign up to the program and just look at the documentation. I wish I could talk more about it, but I get in trouble.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Thank you.
How do you really balance having a job and being an indie dev without shunting your time being a dev to the late hours where you're not doing good work?
Do you know, it's a funny one. There are quite a lot of us at Unity and any other game engine, I'm pretty sure, that like use it to make games. When I was prior to Unity, I found it really difficult. I was working late into the nights, and you're trying to do. And if you have I used to be in the corporate tech industry. I mean, actually, I still am. I work for Unity, but I mean non-gaming, and it's hard if you've got you have a busy day job, and then you're trying to balance family and learning. The best thing I could say is that the hardest thing is trying to get over that mountain of where you feel like you've actually achieved something. If you're just constantly hammering away at something and not making progress, and that gets down to that. We all know the tips of we should put things into bite-sized chunks, make things deliverable. But honestly, the best thing I ever did was build a game that was around one feature and one feature only. I had one gameplay mechanic, and I just built a game around it. And I gave myself a deadline, 3 months, no more. And shipping it felt amazing. And that shipping that game led to the next one, like, oh, I actually know how to ship it. And then it led to the next one, and it led to the next one, and then it led to a failure. And now it's, and hopefully it'll lead to another one. But working at Unity and working in it is tough, because like I see it all day long, and then I sit in back a bit again, and I'm like, oh, good, here I am again. I get to do this for another. It is challenging, but the one thing I will say that helped me is get around other people who make you better at what you do. Indie development groups were my savior. And I joined local groups. There's loads in Brighton. Right, there's a few, like you'll find them on Facebook groups and whatnot. I'm sure anywhere that you live, there are groups. Do game jams. Like I used to do them. I used to live in Hampshire, and I was quite close to Guildford, and Media Molecule would do game jams. Me and Ethan did them together. Like I love that kind of stuff, because you meet people, you learn things, and yeah, it's hard to do it on your own. When it's just you sat in front of a computer and no network around you, if you're not delivering, it's really hard, and it's very easy to lose motivation and not go through. And the best thing I ever did really was working at Unity, because you realize when I joined, I'm like, I know nothing about this product. Like my coding ability and my knowledge has gone through the roof. Just being around developers and programmers who are like 1,000 times better than I am. I love being, as they call it, the dumbest person in the room, because that's how you learn. So yeah, build a network around you, I would say, and keep things small and achievable. Like, it's a weird thing, right? People think it's like, I don't want to make, I want to make something really good. It's like, but you are. Like, just make something simple and ship it. That's more than most people will ever have done when it comes to making games. All right. No, one more at the front.
As being an art side of things, like someone who haven't done any coding at all, how can I start, like, for the first step, like wanting to indie developer, I guess?
Yeah. Same path as me. I'm a terrible artist and a worse coder. So I started as I was a pixel artist, just playing around with that. I knew a little bit of code. I'd done Java and some stuff before. So C# felt super easy to transfer over to. A lot of people who don't code, visual scripting is really useful. Like, I know there are programmers in the room who are like, oh, visual scripting, but actually it's really good. You can build entire games using visual scripting, and it's built into Unity now. There are plenty of tutorials. Tutorials are good, and the Unity Learn portal has some great stuff on it, but learning to program isn't as difficult as everybody thinks it is. C# is actually quite an easy language to pick up. And once you get going with it, you can make it's kind of like anything, getting over that first hurdle of like, I know nothing, like I don't know what I'm doing, into, oh, actually, like things are moving around the screen and like stuff's happening, and I wrote that, and that's cool. You start to pick it up. Honestly, I did everything through YouTube tutorials. There are so many out there, and there are some really great content creators who make, I mean, obviously your mileage varies on what you're Googling, but the ones with all the views normally are the ones that do well. People like Code Monkey, he does great. It's a shame that, who was the guy who did he quit, Brackies. He used to do some great tutorials. It's a real shame. I learned so much from him. Some of them are super advanced, like Sebastian, I can't pronounce his surname, but like I love what he makes, but I'm like, your math is way beyond my level of comprehension. I actually struggled more with the math than I did the coding. I just didn't pay attention at school. You know, so it's like you realize, oh, you actually do need trigonometry. What? And I'm like, really? Like, yeah, so it's like it's more like the knowledge gaps that you just have to plug. I ended up doing, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I started YouTubing. Remember years ago, GCSE maths tutorials to get kids through it. It's what taught me how, I was like, oh, that makes sense now. My son probably knows more than I do about maths. But yeah, that's YouTube tutorials. It's definitely possible, but visual scripting, if you don't want to do it, is your friend. Right, I think that's it. I'm getting the notice to say, please leave the stage and the building. Thank you all. I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope it was useful.